Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about 2 soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is Joe DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games that they come from, without getting too bogged down in music theory. Joe, what are this week's games?
Up first is Ubisoft's ambitious attempt at a cinematic sci-fi experience in 2003, Beyond Good and Evil.
Following that is another Ubisoft soundtrack standout. This one is from 2015's Assassin's Creed Syndicate, which ended the second arc of historical stealth games with arguably its best musical score. That's right, it's a Ubisoft double pack this week. It just happened to be that way when we were working out our list of games. And definitely excited to talk about these ones this week.
I'm very weirdly excited because I learned some things about this game that I'm bringing to the table that I really didn't know. This game had a very interesting development cycle.
Plus, with Beyond Good and Evil, you have the sequel that's still in development, and even that has a long history to it.
Oh yeah.
Beyond Good and Evil, not a game that I have ever played. I feel like I own 3 copies of it across PC and all of the consoles, but it's also a game that I feel like it has all of the hallmarks of a game that I would like. I mean, just the kind of adventure, combat, the photography sounds like it'd be right up my alley, but it's certain things like you hear that the game just doesn't age well, or it really shows its age. And yeah, it's from 2003. It's going to be a little rough around the edges. Yeah,
so I have played it, but I never beat it because I got to the final boss, and the final boss sucks. So much that it's one of 2 games in my entire life.
Why is that a thing in mid 2005? Paper Mario Thousand Year Door is the other one, and it was that 2004, 5, something like that. But yeah, I mean, just a brutal final boss.
Thousand Year Door is just because Shadow Queen is a massive wall of difficulty. Wow, the game ramps up at that just one fight. Meanwhile, the final boss of Beyond Good and Evil just isn't good. It's just not a good fight. It's not fun to play. I don't enjoy it. The rest of the game, it's all right. It's definitely a game that came out in 2003. I do think that parts of it aged kind of well. But a lot of it is just yeah, this sure is a 2003 video game. And some of the dev story might actually shed some light on as to why it feels like that. So let's jump into that, shall we? Beyond Good and Evil came out for the PlayStation 2, Xbox, GameCube, and PC in 2003. Weirdly enough, in this staggered release, they all come out within a month of each other, November and December. But none of them on the same day. Every single version released on a different day.
Interesting.
It was directed by Michel Ancel, who is famous for being the creator of Rayman. He's famous for being the creator of this game too, but for the most part, he is well known for creating the Rayman franchise, and he's still currently the guy who heads up that franchise for the most part.
Yeah, right now he's obviously working on the sequel for Beyond Good and Evil. He had that game. It was a Gamescom, I want to say 2017. Do you remember Wild?
No, I don't think I do.
So it was this game, and it's one of these ones where it was announced at a PlayStation press conference at a Gamescom, and it's, Michel Ancel's behind it, and you can, kind of traverse this open world and kind of recruit animals for assistance. And it was this thing where they stumbled across a bandit camp and took control of a bear, and the bear was able to scare them all off. But yeah, it was Michel Ancel, and I think this was either before or shortly after, where he had the reveal for Beyond Good and Evil 2, and came out on stage and was very emotional. I mean, the guy's brilliant, but whenever I see his name, I wonder what happened to Wild.
I honestly don't remember that. It might be just because it happened at Gamescom, because in my head, it's just all right, Gamescom, that's a thing. The full dev team was about 30 people, which I find This was a AAA game. That's how AAA games were made back in the day.
That is not a lot.
30 people. Like, what? You think about that compared to now when, like, dev teams are hundreds of people, if not thousands.
Oh, yeah, it was like more like 300 people.
Like, yeah, it's insane to think that this big AAA holiday release was 30 people. So their goal was apparently to pack a whole universe onto a single CD, that is a direct quote, and make the player feel like, quote, an explorer with a sense of absolute freedom. They didn't quite hit that goal. They did the best they could with what they had, but obviously this was going on a PlayStation 2 and a GameCube and an Xbox, and those could only do so much. They wanted it to be slightly linear. It was a linear story, so there's no like branching endings or anything like that. And there never was planned to be, which is also very interesting to me. But they did that because they wanted to provide a meaningful story. And this was back in the time when like you didn't see a lot of like very meaningful stories with a lot of branches to them because it was hard. It was very hard back then. We were in a pre Mass Effect world. We were in a pre what other games even would have been then that would have had these kinds of branches and stuff. I don't know. Point is, it's not really a thing you saw in games anyways, so I'm not super surprised. But they wanted it to have the same sort of feeling as a film. So they were kind of ahead of their time there, because this is pre-Uncharted, which is what really started the big cinematic gameplay thing.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
The influence on the game are cited as Ghibli films, which, yeah, okay, I can see that. Ghibli films with a bit more grit behind them.
Talking animals, yeah.
You can see it very easily. As well as current media coverage and politics, and eventually rolled in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks.
Woof.
Yeah. So, this game was originally super different from what actually came out. It was a lot more open, exploration-wise. Jade was originally a teenage girl, and that's only, like, 2 of the changes that were made throughout the course of development that I was able to read. Apparently, there are a lot more that just Michel Ancel has just never told anybody. The reason the game got overhauled so hard is because they showed it off at E3 2002, and people did not like it. Got a lot of negative reception. Just didn't really hold up well. So they went back to the drawing board and were like, all right, we have to redo the whole thing, basically. Jade got aged up to an adult. The exploration was pared down considerably. Funnily enough, the game that Michel Ancel says is directly responsible for paring down the exploration is Wind Waker, because he played Wind Waker, didn't like all the sailing. And so they cut a lot of it out of Beyond Good and Evil. I found that really funny.
Well, his loss.
Yeah. The first run was closer to games like Eco than what we originally got, which is
weird.
Strange. I can't even imagine what that would have looked like.
Yeah. No, I actually like the style that it goes with it for the era. I think it holds up better, especially when they brought it over to HD. I mean, like it stands out.
Mm-hmm. But all that was changed just to make it more commercially viable, and they brought it back to E3 in 2003. Much, much, much better reception. So that was cool. Unfortunately, the changes apparently left a lot of the dev team very demoralized, and Ancel claims that the game that ended up shipping felt more like a sequel than a rework to the original project. So you don't hear that very often. That's a really weird way to put it.
At the same time, though, like they were definitely constrained by the technology, so. And
also only had a year. Game was still coming out in 2003.
Oh, geez. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Well, then you also think, you think of E3s now, and it's like, when was the last time a game was received negatively, that people didn't like it? I mean, like you describe. Maybe it's back in an era where it was certainly more industry focused as opposed to trying to appease to every consumer. But that's really interesting to think, like, what was it, maybe 2006 Sony with this giant enemy crab, Genji 2? I mean, like, was that maybe the last time it was said, like, ooh, what's that? I don't know.
Might have been. I don't know. I know there are things that have been badly received, but I can't think of another game where it would have been badly received to the point where the game gets an entire rework before release.
Right.
For sure. So, again, unlike 2002, went back to E3 in 2003. People liked it that time. Comes out over the holidays, and it gets pretty good reviews. The numbers I saw averaged around mid to high 80s. Nothing really 5-star about it. A lot of GamePro, my favorite quote came from GamePro, who referred to the game as a jack of all trades, but a master of none. And I kind of agree with that. It does a lot of stuff, but it doesn't really do anything particularly fantastic. It doesn't do anything particularly badly. Well, it does a couple of things kind of badly, but nothing like, oh man, blows your socks off. Maybe in 2003, they would have been closer to that, but judging by these reviews, I'm not entirely sure they were.
Translating that to today, it makes you think of the description for Days Gone, which is still a few weeks away from release on PS4. But a lot of previews for that were saying, like, it has all the elements of AAA games, and yeah, it's good and it's fun, but nothing that stands out as, like, exceptional.
Yeah, and basically, most of the reviews boiled down to, it's got a great setting, it's got great characters, but the gameplay kind of feels unfocused, which I imagine had a lot to do with the fact that the game got entirely reworked a year before release. So, this is where we get to the unfortunate part, being that Beyond Good and Evil was a commercial failure. Did not sell well. There are multiple things that have been blamed for this. One being that it came out during a very crowded holiday season. Its competition during the months of November and December in 2003 would have included Mario Kart Double Dash, Final Fantasy X-2, Max Payne 2, Silent Hill 3, the PC release of Knights of the Old Republic, and, stupidest of all of them, Prince of Persia, Sands of Time.
Oh, come on.
Another Ubisoft game.
Come on. And, like, that's the revolutionary title from Ubisoft at the time.
Well, yeah. You want to know what? You want to know why? The other thing blamed is because one of those Ubisoft games got all the marketing money. Guess which one it was? Hint, it was not Beyond Good and Evil. Guess which one was a commercial success? Hint, it was not Beyond Good and Evil.
Oh, man.
So those are the two main things that are blamed for Beyond Good and Evil not doing very well upon its initial release. It did much better when it re-released the HD remake, remaster, whatever it was. I saw it called both. I assume it's more of a remaster. It did much better when that released in 2011, but the people at Ubisoft were like, that's cool, but it's too little too late for us to really refer to Beyond Good and Evil as a success. And because of this commercial failure, the sequel got put on hold. This was supposed to be the first game of a trilogy, which is always really sad when you hear that about games. My favorite being Shenmue was supposed to be the first of 14 games.
I've never heard that about Beyond Good and Evil, though. That's really interesting.
I also did not know that. Then there was just radio silence for a long time. Beyond Good and Evil 2 was announced using a teaser trailer at one point that was Paige and Jade just broken down on the side of a road.
I remember that.
And that was the only thing people heard about Beyond Good and Evil for years. This game was, and kind of still is, on most lists of, here's the vaporware titles that we're still waiting for. It was officially announced to be in pre-production It was officially announced in 2008, but then the game got put on hold for Rayman Legends, or Rayman Origins, and then later Rayman Legends.
Yeah, the 2008 one, like that was the one that was kind of tied with there was like a teaser gameplay sort of spec that was out there, and it looked a lot like Uncharted, to the point where like I saw that and I'm like, yo, sign me up for that. I want that, because I was, coming off, playing some of the Uncharted games. Yeah, I again, fond memories of that.
Of course, later on, it was revealed that Beyond Good and Evil 2 was officially in pre-production, and then it's shown up at the past 2 E3s in some form, if I remember correctly. It was revealed that it is going to be a prequel instead of a sequel, which kind of disappointed a couple of people, because they wanted another game with Jade, not whoever this other character is, but it'll still probably be good. This is one of those games where I am very, very interested to see what they do with modern hardware, because it feels like modern hardware is going to be able to get them a lot closer to their original vision than a PlayStation 2 was going to be able to do so. So hopefully that works out very well. It is allegedly in development right now, but for a lot of Beyond Good and Evil fans, it's kind of in that same spot that Kingdom Hearts 3 was in for a lot of people, where they'll believe it's real when it's in their hands.
Yeah, I don't blame them for that one.
So the music of Beyond Good and Evil was done by Christophe Héral. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
That sounds right.
I'm going to mispronounce a lot of French names in this episode. I don't speak French. Just going to warn y'all right now. So don't at me, or do, because I'd like to know that I'm mispronouncing things. I couldn't find where exactly he was born, but I do know he was born in France in 1960. That's the closest I can get. That's better than last week, where I didn't even know what year the dude was born. Both of his grandfathers were big musicians, one of them being an operatic baritone, and the other being a mandolin player, which is a combo that we have yet to see among music-playing relatives.
I'm just imagining those two playing together, like the high-pitched strings of the mandolin and then roll.
So, I was able to find 2 good interviews with this guy. Unfortunately, there is a third interview that I was able to find that is apparently supposed to be super good and was on a Beyond Good and Evil fan site, but it's all in French.
Yep. I was going to say, I wonder what could be wrong with that. Yep, there it is.
It's super weird that this is not a problem that I have come up on researching any of our Japanese composers, but the instant we get a French dude, there's one in a language I don't speak. But I did find 2 English interviews, and in one of them he said that he started studying piano at age 6, but then quit a year later because he decided he was going to be a professional skier, not a musician. And then 11 years later said, "What am I doing?" and went back to studying music. He claims that he takes inspiration from pretty much every classical composer that's ever existed, I guess. His list included Vivaldi, Bach, Mozart, just to name a few. And he scored his first short film at age 26. That's right. Christophe Héral is not a video game composer for the most part. He does French short films and made-for-TV films, pretty much. He's got a ton of those under his belt and like 4 games. So he really likes working very closely with directors. He believes that they are the ones that have created the image, and he is merely enriching it with his sounds that add an extra layer of depth to their vision. And I think that's a pretty interesting way of looking at it, and that makes sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
He was introduced to Ansel by a mutual friend of theirs, whom he had worked on a TV special with, because Ansel wanted something that did not sound like a video game soundtrack. When he met with Ansel and was being talked to about doing the soundtrack for this game, the first thing he said was, "I'm not a gamer. I don't know anything about video games." And Ansel apparently said, like, cool. Because he wanted somebody who wouldn't feel like they were, quote, applying their grandmother's recipe, meaning he didn't want somebody that was going to just, what is Koji Kondo doing at this time? What are they doing over at Square? That kind of thing. He wanted somebody completely blank from an entirely different industry with an entirely different sound. And it shows.
Yeah, I was going to say he sure got what he asked for. Absolutely.
So his discography, like I said, he mostly does French short films and made-for-TV movies. He did not do another video game after Beyond Good and Evil for 8 years when he came back to do, of all things, an Adventures of Tintin game called The Secret of the Unicorn in 2011.
Never heard of that one.
I also have never heard of that game. He then was brought on to do the music for Rayman Origins and Rayman Legends.
Oh man, those are awesome soundtracks.
They're really good soundtracks. And he is currently the one behind the music for Beyond Good and Evil 2.
Good, as he should be.
So that's it made me very happy to see that he is being brought in for the sequel. He was originally hired to do the music again because Ansel figured his background in film would just be very fitting for this game that their main aim was to make something that felt like a film. Makes sense. And Héral, when making the soundtrack, specifically wanted to include instruments and languages from all over the world, including Spanish, Bulgarian, Arabic, more than that even. And you would think that having all of those very different languages and musical styles would make a soundtrack of this type feel very schizophrenic. But I think one of the most impressive parts of this soundtrack is that it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like everything meshes together very well, and that's very cool. For the fictional language of the villain alien race called the Doms, they actually created a fictional language that is based on an emphasis of rolling R sounds, which is also super cool. He didn't know anything about the universe of the game, which is weird. He just, according to him, he just started by making some music. He walked into the studio, knew nothing about the game, just wrote some music.
I think it kind of worked out though, because it ended up being, trying to be this world of all different sorts of creatures and they can all talk. And so bringing in all those languages, like all those sorts of cultures, I think it kind of worked to help flesh out this sort of future set world.
Oh, I agree. And I think the fact that he didn't know anything about the universe and he just started making music is a really cool contrast to like when we're talking about Danny Baranowski and how he was like, I'd play all the levels without sound and then I'd write the music.
Right. Yeah.
Like that's a really weird contrast to a guy who's been working with games his whole career and a guy who this is the first time he's touched a game. He's used to working in film for like a decade.
Yeah, very, very different creative processes.
He was assisted in orchestration by Laetitia Pansanel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And a large amount of the singing and sound effects were provided by Héral's brother, Patrice Héral. All of the people talking around the planet of Hylas, which is where this game takes place, those are all Héral. All of them. Maybe not all of the like NPCs, but as far as I could tell, like just when you're walking around the town and hearing people talk, the voices are Héral, according to Wikipedia. Is that accurate? I don't know. It's Wikipedia. Christophe Héral could have put that in himself to make himself look cool. I don't know. It makes frequent use of sampling, including one song that is not on my list because I don't think it's a very good song. It's not even on the cutting room floor because, again, I don't think it's a very good song. The song is called Metal Gear Doms.
Metal Gear.
Which is also really funny. Especially when you think the guy doesn't know video games.
No,
so he accidentally named his song after a video game.
Especially when, this is trying to be more film-like, something like Metal Gear Solid tried to do.
I didn't even make that connection. That's incredible. That's so many layers of coincidence. But apparently that song samples Héral's neighbors playing in their backyard with scrap metal. The soundtrack has never been released as an official album, except for Ubisoft did release it in its entirety for free as a free download, but it's never been released as like a thing you can buy.
Mm-hmm.
Ever. It's not on Spotify. Trust me, I checked. You can't buy it on iTunes. It's just Ubisoft has it up for download. That's where you get it.
It just also makes the titling a little weird, too.
Yeah. We found this out while we were putting together the outline for this episode, but I think it's just a side effect of the time period it's from. You'll find that with a lot of games from this time period is that nobody can agree on what the songs are called because there was no official release for so long.
Right.
That everybody knew the songs by different names for so long. It's not like today where you've got video game soundtracks on Spotify. You can buy the whole Pokemon soundtrack on iTunes. It wasn't like that.
You had the final boss battle and people were referring it to as fight, fierce.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, that's exactly the main one that surprised me so much. But this soundtrack has been included as part of the video games live set, which is pretty cool and speaks to how well known this soundtrack is. I think the soundtrack is the best part to come out of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Just in general. So let's jump into some critical tracks, shall we?
Absolutely.
Let's talk about Hylian Suite. It's very weird not to say Hylian Suite, but that's not what this is. It's not Hyrule. They get that. It's Hylis, so I'm going to assume that it's supposed to be Hylian.
I'd agree with that, yeah.
So, why not? This song is beautiful. I believe it is the song that plays when you're just going around the waters of Hylis on your hovercraft. I'm going to give full disclosure. I played this game 2 years ago, and I don't fully remember where this song plays. I think it's when you're just sort of going around the planet.
It definitely has an overworld theme to it, so yeah.
It does, and it really has that exploring feeling to it, which really, speaks to what the game was originally supposed to be. It was supposed to be closer to Wind Waker, or, again, Eco, I guess, than the game we actually got. And I think that this is super impressive given that it's all MIDI. It's all on I keep wanting to say it's all on a PlayStation 2 when it was all on everything. But that era, PS2 is what this sort of MIDI soundtrack brings to mind.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
And just imagine what he's going to be able to do with an orchestra.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's going to be incredible.
There's no way 2 isn't going to have an orchestrated soundtrack, right?
Yeah, it absolutely will. Yeah.
So this one, more than anything, just makes me excited to see what they do with the sequel. Next is, I guess, called Sins of the Father, even though I saw a bunch of places. I saw places call it Final Boss, Fight, Fierce. But Sins of the Father is a much better name for it. I don't know why it would be called that in context, but it sounds cool.
Whoa!
Which, that's another Metal Gear connection. Granted, this one would have come a lot later, but still, what's happening?
I even played this song for someone, and they're like, is that from Metal Gear Solid?
See, this song reminds me of, I have it down on my list, I think of Devil May Cry. When we were talking about Devil May Cry 3, for some reason I could easily hear this being in a Devil May Cry game.
Oh, I get that too, for sure. Yeah, I hear you.
Specifically, this makes me think of the Nevin fight. It's very similar in tone. It's a good thing this song is good, because the final boss is not. As I've already covered, it's a bad final boss, and I don't like it. But this song is definitely super, super good. It's high energy, it feels epic, feels dire. And again, anything that like makes me draw a connection to Devil May Cry music, not bad. Not bad at all. Next up, we have a very sudden change in tone. Mama Goes Garage. It's very Jamaican because it plays in Mama Goes Garage, which is where you go to get upgrades for your hovercraft, and it's staffed entirely by Jamaican rhinos.
I was gonna say, where's a Marley when you need him for this one?
One of the rhinos looks a lot like Bob, like he's supposed to be an analog to Bob Marley, not gonna lie. They're very interesting characters. And I like this song because it's a lot different of a tone than pretty much any other song on the soundtrack.
Oh yeah, it comes out of nowhere.
a lot of the rest of the soundtrack is very serious or very like atmospheric or kind of just sad or intense. And this is just like, yeah, we're doing the Jamaican thing. Woo! Put this engine in your hovercraft. So I really needed to point this out because I love this song and I love this store. I actually had to go look up a video of Mama Goes Garage to make sure I was remembering them correctly, and I was. And they're delightful, and I love them.
I wonder which came first. The music inspired like the vision of the characters, or like the character inspired the music?
See, that's a very good question because as I said before, Héral states that he didn't know anything about the universe when he started working on the music for the game. So part of me wants to say maybe the music came first. I don't know.
Or maybe, you know, if you wanted to work closely with Ansel, maybe at a certain point they're like, all right, show me kind of what you have in mind.
Yeah, possibly. After that, we've got my favorite song in the game, and I think the most interesting, historically, Propaganda.
My favorite too.
This song's super good.
It's definitely it's this one, and it's actually the song on your cutting room floor. When I think of two songs from the soundtrack, first is Propaganda, and then the second one is on the floor there.
Yeah.
So, but Propaganda, like it's just so different compared to like any other track you'll really hear in a video game.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me. It has the same sort of feeling as something I'd hear in like Persona 3 a little bit.
Sure. Yeah.
I can see some like comparisons to it, or like a better example, feels like something I'd hear in Jet Set Radio.
Oh, yes.
That is definitely somewhere I feel like I'd hear a song like this. Funnily enough, not the song that was originally supposed to play. This song plays in the Akuta Bar, which is just a bar. It's a bar you can go to, and I believe that's where you get side quests, if I remember correctly. Memories are fuzzy there, but I do remember that it plays in a place called the Akuta Bar. But originally the song that played there was one called Funky Mullah. And the reason this song was removed was because it includes samples of a Muslim call to prayer. According to Héral, the song was composed 3 days before 9/11.
Oh man, I mean, like the song itself is catchy and like it's not a problem, but you start putting it in that context at that time, it was a different era.
Yeah, they figured that including Muslim prayer vocals in a game shortly after the 9/11 terrorist attacks would be in bad taste. Honestly, in spite of their reasoning, I think Propaganda was the better choice anyways. I think it worked out for the best. Yep, it's a much better song. Funky Mola is a good song. Don't get me wrong. But Propaganda is just so good.
Just do it, man.
Apparently, the lyrics are in Bulgarian and talk about the use of propaganda in the Soviet Union. And in fact, at the very beginning of the song, there is a lady speaking very fast about propaganda in Bulgarian. That is apparently a recording of a phone call with Héral's Bulgarian friend talking about propaganda and the use of propaganda, which I also found very, very interesting. It's always kind of cool when you can tell exactly like, I always figured it would just be like a stock sort of sample that he found somewhere, but no, It's a recording of a phone call that he had with his friend. But yeah, Propaganda. Really good song. So good. So atmospheric. What is it with bar themes? And they're always good.
They are always good, aren't they?
This is the third, music that plays in a bar that we have had on the show so far.
I have music coming up that is played in a pub, and it's awesome.
That's gonna make 4. Man, put all games in bars from now on.
Yes.
All of them. Doesn't matter if it fits the setting or not. Our last song for the 5 critical tracks is my second favorite song in the game, Fun and Minigames. Un poquito de benzina para tu lindo coche, Juanito el mecano, estaba preta de turbo para que quede el mejor. El mejor. Un poquito de benzina para tu lindo coche, Juanito el mecano, estaba preta de turbo para que quede el mejor. El mejor. Jole, 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 quanto rueda del sol. Jole, 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 oh quanto rueda del sol. Jole, 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 quanto rueda del sol. This song plays during hovercraft races, and it's a good thing that the song is good because, again, this gameplay isn't. Even I felt vindicated looking into the reviews this game got upon release because even they said, hey, the hovercraft races aren't very good. Good. Thank God I was not alone. They're bad. They're bad parts of the video game.
That kind of reminds me of in Sly Cooper. I know I'm going to knock Sly Cooper, which is sacrilege to you.
Oh, no, it's fine.
But the Murray car driving is garbage.
I can stand those races because I'm very good at them now. But that's after playing this game for a decade. But it's very similar to that, yes. They play very similarly, if I remember correctly.
But the song is amazing.
The song is incredible. The lyrics are in Spanish, though I would look down at comments for the videos that had the song in them, and people in the comments were like, I speak Spanish, this song is saying nothing. This song is gibberish.
It's got that catchy call and response, though.
It does. And it's also got that part with the tres, dos, uno, vámonos. That part is so good. That part gets me so hyped every time it comes up.
Pretty sure they're actually speaking Spanish there.
That part's actually Spanish. Apparently there are swaths of it that are in Spanish, but a lot of them are they just made up words that sound Spanish. And when it is Spanish, the lyrics mean nothing. They have no meaning anywhere. So I don't know. I don't speak Spanish. Look, I'm just a white dude that speaks English, and I barely speak that language well. So,
but it sounds good.
Oh, it sounds so cool. This song is so good. And those are my 5 critical tracks. On the cutting room floor, this song is probably the most iconic song in the game, which is weird to say when I'm it's on my cutting room floor. This song didn't have as much of an impact with me as I guess it had with literally everybody else on the planet
Huh.
So that's on me, I guess. But it's still a very, very good song, and it had to have been mentioned in some fashion, and that would be Home Sweet Home.
If there's one song that you have to take away from this game, and when it comes to the context of like quizzes about video game music, we're gonna play a lot of video game music songs in a few seconds. Like, it's either this or propaganda that gets used for Beyond Good and Evil. So like, just keep it in your memory banks there if you ever like doing those quizzes.
Which is why, hey, trivia people, if you're going to do trivia like that, throw them off. Use Mama Goes.
There you go.
When your mama won't go, Mama Go. That's a line said in the game, and I love it. So what'll I never forget about the game? It's basically just the music and the setting. Because, to be honest, if you haven't guessed already, I don't remember a lot about the game. I played it, and a lot of it seems to have gone in one ear and out the other. That being said, I still love the setting of Hillis. I love the sort of unique NPCs. Having the animal people makes this setting super unique, especially for back in the day for a video game, because mixing that with the humans and then also this sort of setting that almost reminds me of Bebop-esque stuff, where it's like dilapidated but also futuristic at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And you definitely get that vibe for the intro trailer for the sequel when it was revealing that. Like that. That's a good way of describing it. Bebop, like Cowboy Bebop for sure.
But for the most part, like, I think this game was made a generation too early. I think if they had made it on the PS3, it probably A, would have been way closer to its original vision, and B, probably would have come out as a better game. Overall.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, you're right there.
I don't think the game aged all that well. It feels ridiculously 2003-y, which is not really a great thing to say. And you can probably, like, look, Peter brought up Sly Cooper 1 earlier. That's one of my favorite games of all time. If you went back and played that game in 2019, the year of our Lord 2019, you'd probably think that game has some problems. And you are correct. And that's kind of how I felt going back to Beyond Good and Evil in 2017 when I played it. So, hey, you win some, you lose some. Not every game can age super well. Most games don't. That's just something that happens with old retro games. Nothing wrong with it. Doesn't make the game bad. I think the game's all right. Yeah, I don't remember a ton from it outside of the setting and some of the music.
Where's Wild, Ansel? I want to know more about Wild.
Yeah, please comment in the video if you know where Wild is. So, for our transitions, we usually like to highlight a song by a fan, either on OC Remix or something else. Today it is actually from OC Remix. It is called Frame of Mind by SGX, Destructo, and Aurora. Weirdly enough, the only Beyond Good and Evil remix that seems to be on OC Remix. But hey, what can you do? So, enjoy.
Okay, so continuing with the Ubisoft theme, it is my pleasure to talk about Assassin's Creed Syndicate. Not really the Assassin's Creed game that most people think of when they come to speak about the franchise and think about the soundtracks involved with it. But Assassin's Creed Syndicate was developed by Ubisoft Quebec, and of course it was assisted by plenty of other Ubisoft studios, as is the trend, especially with the Assassin's Creed games. Just studios from all over the world for Ubisoft just chip in for different parts here and there. And of course, published by Ubisoft. It was released on October 23rd, 2015 on PS4 and Xbox One, November 19th, 2015 on PC. In case you have not heard about the Assassin's Creed series or do not know what the gameplay is like, it's a third-person, stealth-based, open-world action-adventure game series. And in Syndicate, you play as twins Jacob and Evie Fry, who arrive in London in 1868 as the Industrial Revolution sort of reaches its climax. Now, it's a time of great inequality and poverty in a city that's controlled by the Templar Order. So conversely, the assassins must loosen the grip of organized crime that is led by Crawford Starrick. And in the meantime, they also have to build up their gang of the Rooks to change the balance of power in London. The Assassin's Creed games generally are known for taking place in a historical time period, but they are also framed by a modern-day story, and this is no different in Syndicate, where the player plays a character with no face. It's just kind of that first-person perspective, but you're an initiate of the Assassin's Brotherhood, and you're attempting to discover the location of a powerful artifact using this simulation technology of the past. It's all about characters in the future, the present, rather, kind of going to the past through memories that are stored in DNA to kind of relive those experiences. And it's the constant battle between the free will of the assassins and the power and control of the Templars. So that's just Assassin's Creed and that game in a nutshell. Syndicate was different from a gameplay experience, though, because it was the most recent historical time period that an Assassin's Creed game has explored. So as a result, London is just this big towering city. And so instead of climbing up these buildings as players would in the past, a Batman Arkham-like grapple was sort of installed in the gameplay to just get up to the rooftops faster, not to just run across and plan your strategy, but just to scale that verticality a whole lot faster. It made the gameplay a whole lot faster, a whole lot better. The game was originally leaked on December 2nd, 2014 via Kotaku as Assassin's Creed Victory. And maybe that name rings a bell because it kind of set off a whole slew of things with Kotaku being banned by Ubisoft because of how they leaked this and all sorts of things. The game was officially revealed, though, on May 12th, 2015. It was the quickest leaked Assassin's Creed game at the time, and I think still to this day, because even more so when it was coming off of Assassin's Creed Unity, which did not do too well. It was just, between 1 and 2 months since release of that. And it's like, oh, and by the way, here's the next one. So at this point, I kind of want to stop and just say, I love the Assassin's Creed series. If it wasn't apparent at this point, Joe, I wanted to ask, your experience with the AC games, with Syndicate at all in particular?
My experience with Assassin's Creed is Assassin's Creed 2 and 2 hours of Assassin's Creed Brotherhood.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the entirety. I have not touched an Assassin's Creed game since. I have been told to play Black Flag. Syndicate, I have heard from people, it is pretty good. And I've heard great things about Odyssey, but I haven't played any of them.
I think you're pretty right on a lot of those assumptions of what you've heard from other people. 2 is certainly the one to kind of get into the series with, and if it's for you, it hooks and sinks your teeth in you like it did for me. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the series. I mean, I'm wearing my Rook shirt right now for Assassin's Creed Syndicate. I have a belt with an assassin buckle. I'm big into this series, and it's weird because usually when I talk about my favorite games, it's Nintendo games that are really inspirational and kind of a big impact on my life, or things like the Mass Effect series. But if we're talking top 10, top 15, Assassin's Creed is right up there. It's definitely among my favorite series for sure. And I mean, even to the point where it's I'm curious, how would I rank my list of favorite games in the series? You can say what's best, but if I were to rank like my order of favorites, if anyone out there is curious, it would go Odyssey, then 2, then Syndicate. So it's like, it's pretty high up there. Brotherhood, Black Flag, Rogue, Revelations, Origins. 3, Liberation is sometimes not counted as a main game, but it's pretty important. They reference Aveline later in the series. Abstergo Entertainment is a big deal later in the series. It's the first appearance of that. So I like to count Liberation. And then Unity, and then the first Assassin's Creed. The first one is just rough by today's comparisons, and it's come so far since then. But it's important to talk about, I think, what I consider to be the 3 arcs of Assassin's Creed's story. So many of the games are kind of locked to the historical setting, and you can play them, give or take. Like they're kind of their own isolated stories on that front. But there's this overarching story to Assassin's Creed and this big lore that kind of connects all of the games together. Yet there are key breaks in the narrative. And so when you have the original games of Assassin's Creed, then 2, then Brotherhood, then Revelations, then 3, those are almost like the Desmond arc, because it follows this character, Desmond Miles, and how he is connected through his genes to all of these characters of Altair and Ezio and Connor. So like that's kind of his big role. Spoilers, because we're at that point where we can talk spoilers about older games. Mm-hmm. Desmond dies at the end of 3. And so it's like, it's a distinct like stopping point, or like a big shift in the way the storytelling goes. So when you move on from there, and you're talking about Black Flag and Unity and Rogue and Syndicate here, it's like this second arc that's like the Sage arc in a way. So these games kind of hit a stumbling middling point. Like they didn't know what to do with their modern day story. They involve these characters known as sages throughout these different time periods, who are supposed to be these connections to the precursors, the ones who came before. It's a big whole lore thing, but they tried to tie this in with this one precursor named Juno, who is trying to get back into the world and take over, even though she's like in this data consciousness. See, even explaining it, it just gets really weird. Because like these middling games, like they didn't know what to do. They didn't know where they were going. They were involving Abstergo Entertainment, which is like this digital front for the modern day Templars. So like you're playing these games that Templars have created, and it's super weird. And they're all like, they're all kind of uncertain, and they weren't really pushing towards a story. But then after Syndicate was Ubisoft deciding we need to rethink the franchise. It was the first time after Syndicate launched that Assassin's Creed was not a yearly release. There wasn't a yearly installment of Assassin's Creed. They took a year off. So 2 years after Syndicate was Assassin's Creed Origins, and now they're starting their third attempt at telling an overarching story with like even less sort of impact on the lore in the past. Like it's there if you really care and you want to look it up. But now it's this explorer named Layla Hassan, and she has this role of kind of carrying the story forward. But it's only been Origins and Odyssey so far. My point on rambling is that Syndicate has this really sort of pivotal moment in Assassin's Creed history where there have been so many games up to this point, but it followed off of the heels of Assassin's Creed Unity. And that was unfortunately the game's biggest problem, because Unity was trying these big things in the sort of next generation of consoles. Yeah, there was Black Flag on PS4 and on PS3, but Unity was the first truly next-gen on its own game. And it looked gorgeous. I remember being floored when it was at E3. Like, they're going in these French palaces and like these ballrooms are just glittering gold. And it's like, are you kidding me? Like, this is how graphics look. And they tried multiplayer, which was the big hook then. But everyone remembers Assassin's Creed Unity with the characters without faces.
Yeah.
Everyone. And like, that was what defined the game. That really hurt the sales. And yeah, there was a ton of bugs in Unity, but it really soured a lot of people on the series. So then when Syndicate comes out the next year, it's really a rather good game. And it sold better than Unity, but it was lower than what Ubisoft expected. So that's what kind of led them to think we should reconsider things on where we want Assassin's Creed to go from here. Thus, the second story break. The critical reviews, as far as that goes, it had a Metacritic average of 76, so generally positively. Critics praised the visuals, the likability of the major characters, especially the Fry twins and the antagonist, the interwoven structure of the side quests and main objectives, creative mission design, as well as the lightheartedness of the game and the entertaining story. I would agree with that. The criticism, on the other hand, was directed at the lackluster ending, as well as the aging and repetitive gameplay, and the lack of diverse character models, yet overall critics agreed that it was a major improvement over Unity. I also would agree. So like, the gameplay was starting to show its age, like they weren't evolving too much on that front. And the diverse character models, I think that's more targeted at like the enemies. Like, you only had certain character model face types, like that they just became really standard after a while, or repetitive after a while. So I don't think it's necessarily a diversity issue in Victorian London there. And I also wanted to tie it back to our first episode where we talked about Bear McCreary composing God of War 2018. Bear McCreary scored the Jack the Ripper DLC for the game.
I believe that makes Bear McCreary now the most mentioned composer in the show so far, because he was also mentioned during the Rakuen episode because he was part of that album that Jump was originally written to be on, Akira Yamaoka's Earthquake.
That's right.
Album. So that's 3 now.
First place so far.
How many more places are you going to show up, Mr. McCreary?
We'll talk about like The Walking Dead, Telltale, and then like, oh, Bear McCreary did the show, The Walking Dead. But now it's my pleasure to talk about the composer for Assassin's Creed Syndicate, and that's Austin Wintory.
Yay!
Austin Wintory is goddamn brilliant. Honestly, I'll link an interview in the show notes here because it's fascinating to hear him talk about his creative process, but also just about random topics in general. I would say that Austin Wintory is one of my favorite composers working today. And so when we're talking about this show and highlighting different composers and their works, like, I was eager to get to a game of Austin Wintory's. But you may think of certain other games that he composed the score for, and I'm like, no, Assassin's Creed Syndicate, which is, among the more notable titles he's done, but there are certainly other games that others would point to first. I love his involvement on this score, though, because it is so different than any other Assassin's Creed game, and that's actually what makes it so good. It fits the game and its time period so well. It dives deep into exploring the character dynamics through music. It really uses the different motifs and themes for the setting and what's going on in the game extremely well. So I was really happy to focus on this, especially when we're like, oh, let's do Ubisoft games here, right? But also I was listening to a podcast, and Troy Baker was a guest on it, and he mentioned his involvement on a project that Austin Wintory composed for, and it was A Light in the Void, which is their focus on women in science and like the amazing contributions that they've made. And it was like a blending of like a TED Talk with music and narrative. Just a really fascinating project that I guess has been like in the works for the last year or two. But it was just like, I was listening to that, I'm like, perfect. Like I'm already talking about Austin Wintory this week. So it was just meant to be. So Austin Wintory was born on September 9th, 1984 in Denver, Colorado. And it's interesting to compare previous composers that we've talked about where they're like, they learned music from a very early age, or they came from a family of musicians. According to his biography, he did not play and barely listen to any music before the age of 10, which is when he started to learn how to play the piano. Yet by age 16, he's writing music for and conducting a high school orchestra, and he's conducting pieces for the Utah Symphony at 18. So, man, he's a genius.
Certainly better than me. That is insane to think about. Like, that's probably the fastest turnaround we've had on the show so far. Because, yeah, like you said, usually it's like, I was born to a whole family of musicians, and my mom taught me piano, and blah, 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 blah. Not, yeah, I learned piano, and then 6 years later, I was conducting high school orchestras.
Yeah.
And then 2 years after that, I was conducting a state symphony.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing. So he attended NYU and particularly USC for college, which is where he met Genova Chen. And Genova Chen asked Wintory to score his thesis project, Flow. And so him and Wintory would work on other projects, specifically 2012's Journey. Yeah, Journey, it is really, I'd say, the standout work from his library.
That's a game that's coming to this show eventually.
Yeah, when we start repeating composers there. Because, Austin Wintory is best known for his work on Journey, because it was the first video game score to be nominated for a Grammy Award. It was in the Best Score Soundtrack for Visual Media category. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo happened to win that year. But it was a big accomplishment for a game score. Now, the year before, that was when Civilization 4's Baba Yetu won the Grammy Award. But that was like a single song. It was a song from a video game, or a song written for a video game. It was actually in the Best Instrumental Arrangement Accompanying Vocalists category. Baba Yetu won, but Journey was the first score nominated. And it is a big deal. And even prior to his Grammy nomination, Wintory described video games as having evolved to a full-blown art genre that is right alongside literature and any other form of storytelling. Yes, absolutely.
Damn right.
Wintory, though, is an avid video game player, and he cites certain works that he admires, like BioShock's Welcome to the Rapture, Mass Effect 3's Leaving Earth, Jessica Curry's score of Dear Esther, and Darren Korb's work on Bastion and Transistor.
Hey, I know that game.
Yeah, we talked about that game a little bit.
I know all those games, but but that's Bastion's what we. You get the joke, listener.
It's just really cool though to have someone who is just so passionate about games and just consuming media in general, but knows video games well and knows their language well, so that you can take the natural talent and apply it to scoring music for games. It's just really cool to see. Austin Wintory's discography, we mentioned Flow, we mentioned Journey. Monaco, What's Yours Is Mine is a really cool soundtrack. It's a cooperative heist game, I think would be a best way to describe it, and it uses a silent movie-like frantic piano score. It's just genius.
I constantly forget he did the soundtrack for that game.
Mm-hmm. And it's super cool on that interview I linked. Like, he's sitting in his studio where he works, and he's by a piano, and he's just like, and he's talking about Monaco, and he's just there, and just busts out the main riff to the theme, like right on the piano, and it's super cool to hear and see. He also worked on Leisure Suit Larry Reloaded, and he told the story of how the creator of Leisure Suit Larry, and I guess also the composer, I think it's like both jobs, the same person, but apparently a big fan of his work on Journey, and approached him to work on Leisure Suit Larry, and he's like, sure, because a job's a job, but he's like, I couldn't think of anything more opposite of Journey.
What are you talking about? Journey and Leisure Suit Larry, basically the same game. I see no difference between these two. That's so weird.
It is very, very interesting. He's also well known for working on the Banner Saga series. And then also Absu. And Absu is another fantastic score. I mean, my goodness, so talented. He's also worked on plenty of indie film projects. I mean, at a certain point with certain composers, it's like, it's another way to stay busy and, help friends out. That makes total sense. Not any films I've heard of per se, but definitely keeps busy with the discography there. But to talk about Assassin's Creed Syndicate and just how brilliant this score is in particular, especially for a fan of the franchise like myself, because Wintory is also a fan of Assassin's Creed. He's, previously a fan of playing the Assassin's Creed games, and then Ubisoft approached Wintory to inquire about, they wanted a different sound for the series because, again, at this point, they're coming off Unity. It's not doing too well. They're trying to look for ways to shake up Assassin's Creed. And so, talk to, the hottest composer working in the industry, especially at the time, coming off of Journey, and, kind of look at a game that's taking place in Victorian London. And so he says, sure, well, let's try something different for it. And he thought that his ideas would just have been, thrown out by Ubisoft. Like, I'll get fired. They won't like this at all. And they're like, no, we love it. So he frequently uses throughout the score a 9-piece orchestra that performs 19th century chamber music, but kind of infused with modern ideas, he says. Said, quote, "It's very raw and stripped down and actually pretty intimate." He calls the style of the score Neo-Mendelssohn, where he tried to channel this wonderful dancing quality that he finds in Mendelssohn's chamber music. Now, he wrote more than 3 hours of music for Assassin's Creed Syndicate, and it was actually recorded at the famous Abbey Road Studios in London. But you'd think, Victorian London, it's got to sound like this. It's got to sound like, those Sherlock Holmes movies that were really popular. And that wasn't really the inspiration, didn't really drive, the creativity based on the setting. For Wintory, it was more, he said, quote, "The arc of the twins and their relation to each other and their relation to their biggest sense of purpose, that was something that was of interest to him and this game." So he said that, the game's already telling you that it's in Victorian London. If his score helps emphasize that feeling, great, but you shouldn't take that as the inspiration. Focus more on the characters and the emotional core of what's going on, which kind of mirrors his sort of creative process, especially that he used from Flow, from Journey. And it's obviously what's made him so successful and just a brilliant composer in general, I think. He even tried to shake up what was usually a sort of standard action sound for Assassin's Creed's combat. And so he tried to rethink this by saying, well, combat in Assassin's Creed is almost more like a dance to the death. And to fit the time period, decided to use a waltz feel for the combat tracks. Again, something that he didn't think would work at all, but he just had this feeling, and then Ubisoft loved it. And it's just different takes on that sort of sound. There are other tracks, though, in this soundtrack where he wrote 6 songs that have lyrics to them. And so the lyrics for these songs were written with the help of Australian musical comedy trio Tripod, who had just finished working with Wintory on this project known as This Gaming Life, which is a 2-hour show of original music that they had worked on together with the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. And so these songs essentially they describe them as murder ballads. And they kind of take place after certain key assassinations in the game. And the lyrics are more meant to describe the events of the game, the events of the narrative, to the point where they're played in pubs around the city. And so if you kind of wander around in the open world, you may hear them coming out of a pub, just people are regaling about the tales of what has just happened in London as the Templar Order is being lifted. It's just a really interesting idea, and they're totally different than most of the soundtrack, but they're super catchy. Wintory also provided interesting insight in the fact that when we think about tracks and certain bits of the soundtrack, he says he likes to think about these more as musical cues. Because, yeah, he wrote more than 3 hours of music, and these certain cues are meant to be played at certain moments in the game, certain conditions. But he also has to distill all of that music down to about half of all that into this. He said, games are so fluid in what can happen with a player's interaction that it's almost like this 3D experience in a way. And then a soundtrack is like crushing it down to 2D to like distill like what are the best elements for like to be played, start to finish, and kind of be more representative of the work. I found that really interesting, especially when he elaborated how his musical cues, especially for this game, they can vary depending on the level of the game's completion, how far you are in the game, the player's current location in the world, whether it's day or night. He even said in an interview where if you're at a full completion of the game, where like the final mission is the last thing you have to do, and you're standing on the rooftops in Westminster, again, like right outside the final mission, there's this musical cue that plays in where a soprano voice plays. And among the lyrics that she sings, it's almost like describing what's happening in the narrative. And one of the lines in particular is, "Death is now a welcome guest." And this is a lyric from the opera Dido and Aeneas. Apparently, lyrics from this opera are used throughout the story in different moments like this. But it's an opera by Henry Purcell, which is one of the more famous English composers, who happens to be buried under the organ at Westminster Abbey. So it's like little thoughts like this to just help flesh out the world in this really interesting way, just all sorts of attention to detail, just make this soundtrack something special. I know a lot of fans would probably say, well, what about 2's soundtrack, just for kids' work? I'm like, yes, I'd agree with you. But it also kind of became what was the norm for Assassin's Creed for a while. And I think because this is so different and brought such a fresh take to it, like this is my favorite soundtrack in the Assassin's Creed franchise. And it's why I wanted to talk about this, to not only highlight the Assassin's Creed series, but to talk about a composer I have such immense respect for.
That whole thing about like his thing of like, you've got to score for something where like anything can happen, video games are fluid, that kind of thing. That really reminds me of, if you'll remember back when we were talking about Tetsuya Shibata's work on Devil May Cry 3, he said pretty much the same thing. Where he was like, video games are just like scoring a film, except a lot more unique because you need to be able to account for everything that's going to happen on screen that the player is going to be able to do. So it's very interesting to see an American composer also say the same thing.
So let's talk about those 5 critical tracks. And so we have to start by bringing up Bloodlines. This is the main theme to Assassin's Creed Syndicate. It's a really delicate track that starts off with piano, and then it adds violin and cello, but it has this beautiful build to it, especially to the end of the piece. And the da-da, da-da, da. It's this motif that's used throughout most of the soundtrack. So that sort of pattern will just pop up throughout the soundtrack, and it's a really just noticeable melody that you can really say is like definitive to this game. But it's just the sort of scale of the instruments, not having that many players involved. It's the timbre of the instruments with the strings, but also you'll get some piano. You'll maybe eventually get some flutes. It just really shows, it's a good example of what kind of music we're working with here.
It's a very, very pretty piece. I will. It does remind me a lot. It's the violin completely. Reminds me a lot of Journey. You can definitely hear Journey in there.
Oh, definitely. Absolutely. But then we go to more of the waltz combat sort of music. And I think a good one to highlight this one is Waltzing on Rooftops and Cobblestones. So this one definitely highlights the main riff and motif that's used in the combat of the da 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 da. And so this 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6, like that's straight up waltz. And so whenever you're gonna get a piece in this score that has that feel, just get the sense that it's meant for combat. And so if you're imagining this playing while you're stabbing these blighters, these Templars on the streets, it works better than you think it might, because it complements it so well, and it is that dance to the death for sure. A lot of people like to pick the song "Danza alla Daggers" when it talks about this main sort of dance riff, but I like this one because I think it explores just more instruments, more keys, shows the versatility of that riff a lot better. Interestingly enough, Wintory himself commented on the YouTube version of Ubisoft's official upload of the song, saying, quote, "This track features two amazing soloists. On violin, Sandy Cameron, and on cello, Tina Guo. Sandy is currently on tour around the world with Danny Elfman performing music from Edward Scissorhands. Says, look it up on YouTube, she's amazing. And Tina was my featured soloist on Journey, and she's played on many other scores. Very, very grateful to have them both for elevating ACS so absurdly." So yeah, Tina Guo from Journey. And this is of course in 2015, so maybe Sandy is on another tour, but they're certainly very talented. And there are other violins, there are other cellos that play in this piece orchestra, but there are definitely solo highlights throughout all of the different tracks, and it's just very, very skilled musicians at work.
You want to know what this song reminds me of for some reason?
What's that?
And it might just be the fact that it's a waltz. This is going to sound really stupid. I listen to this and all I hear is the Beast's Castle battle music.
Oh, okay. Okay.
In Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah, okay. I get that.
I think it's just because it's a waltz. It's got a similar instrument set. I don't know. It reminds me of that. Look, I didn't make the rules.
If my work were compared to Yoko Shimomura, I'd call that a pretty good day.
That's fair.
Third track on the critical tracks. Let's go with I Would Have Created a Paradise. So this is the main theme for Crawford Starrick, and it just shows madness personified. It's one thing to have the riff on piano, but when it's followed by a stringed instrument, I think it's the cello because of this kind of mid-range. It's crazy impressive because it's just frenetic and so impressive. But Starrick is established right at the beginning. Like, the game kind of opens on this intro cutscene it's not, usually how a game would open. It's almost like a summation of how things are in London. And there Starek is right at the beginning. And so, like, he's the head honcho. Establish that right up front. Yeah, he has plenty of minions throughout London, kind of taking control of different industries. But, he's the big bad that you're working up to at the end of the game. And it helps make him one of the better antagonists throughout the whole series, I think. You think of Cesare Borgia from Brotherhood. You think of Haytham Kenway from 3, kind of where they establish them early, and then you have the whole game to loathe them, to know that I'm going to get you. You're going to meet your comeuppance. But this theme does a brilliant job of selling his personality.
Yakuza is another series that does very good with villains that, oh man, it's going to feel real good to beat you down.
Yeah, and it helps when the music just really emphasizes that. It's a really, really cool piece.
Mm-hmm.
The next one is another battle theme, but it just shows the flexibility of this sort of sound. It's Top Hats and Sword Kings. So yeah, we still have that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sort of pace and feel. It's the battle music, but it implements the main theme really, really cleverly. And I really like that part about this piece. It was also featured heavily in Ubisoft's video featurette, all about the soundtrack, and just showing the recordings. It's a highlight on the soundtrack, I'd say, for sure. And it's actually probably, when you talk about Victorian London sound and what you can compare to other works, when you talk about those Sherlock Holmes movies with Robert Downey Jr., it's probably the most sounding to that soundtrack. But it just builds this incredible ending where the orchestra feels so much bigger than it actually is. And it's a rush. And I just really, really have a soft spot for this song.
You mentioned the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock score and how this sounds very, very similar to it. All it's really missing is the harpsichord, I guess.
Yeah.
Now that I think about it. Because like that Sherlock Holmes movie, that's one of my favorite film scores. Fantastic film score. But yeah, I can definitely hear what you're saying there. Just missing a harpsichord. That's all it needs. You forgot the harpsichord, Austin. Come on, man.
And then the last song on the critical tracks list here, something totally different, but it's my favorite song from the soundtrack. It's Underground.
Born from secret seeds that are scattered in the night time. London is fed upon the meat of the dead. They're one shallow inch below the town. Underground, underground, leave them underground.
Now this is one of those songs with vocals, and it's just this haunting piece with piano, but really powerful vocals. And for spoilers' sake, it takes place during the ending cutscene of the game, when kind of wrapping up the modern day events, and we're showing what happens there. It's this battle between assassins and Templars in the crypt in Buckingham Palace, and they're battling over this artifact, the Shroud. And this haunting song with these really poignant lyrics is playing, and it's this powerful ending to the game, honestly. For the modern day story to not be as important, to have it go out on this is just, it's painful, especially when there's this uncertainty over the character Rebecca Crane's fate. And like, she's shot, and Sean Hastings, her partner, is like, come on, Bex, like, hang in there. And they have to say later, it's like, oh, she's fine, but as like an afterthought in just fan communication. But like, it's a cliffhanger in a way on a character that's been there since 2, and you're just like, like it can't end there. But this vocal piece is so powerful. And it's interesting to hear Wintory talk about it in general, that working on this score, he says that he lost 2 very important people in his life while working on the project, like one at the beginning and one near the end. And so Underground's probably the biggest indication of channeling his grief and using work to just power through it. Because the sadness is also just implemented throughout different elements of the score. But man, I really, really love this song.
It's weird how many times the whole grief thing has come up on the show, because there's also the Katamari episode where it's not 100% clear whether or not grief came into that song, Being Lonely Rolling Star, if you'll remember that story. But it's surprising just how much, and I guess it shouldn't be surprising because that's just a thing that happens with musicians. That's their method of coping. I don't know. You don't expect to see that in video games, I guess. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
So my tracks on the cutting room floor, I have to bring up this other vocal song because it's like the complete opposite of Underground. It's like upbeat, it's punchy, it's punny, it's just really clever. It's jokes, jokes, jokes.
He opted to collaborate with a hooded reprobate. The blighter and assassin made a deadly double bill. Jokes, 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 make 'em laugh until they choke. Fairly slay 'em in the aisles, maidens fair and princes charming. Thrills, 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 dashing feats and bloody spills. And I guarantee you'll never see the ending coming.
So the recording on the soundtrack is done by Tripod. Listen to the whole thing. It's telling the story of Jacob Fry's interactions with Maxwell Roth. And Maxwell Roth is the leader of the Blighters, this gang that's taken over the London streets. Maxwell Roth is like the Joker, but with a British accent. He's certifiably mad. And his sequence is kind of near the end of the game, like right before the big comeuppance with Starrick. But it's just a really interesting sequence. And so for this song to sum up what happens in that arc is really just fun. But then in the credits, there's another version of this song where I believe it's Paul Amos, who's the voice actor for Jacob Fry. And he has his British accent and so plays it very differently. But it's another take on the song because it's a long credit sequence. But another fun take on the song. I think when a lot of people think of vocal songs on this soundtrack, it's either Underground for like the heavy serious or jokes, jokes, jokes for the upbeat retelling of what's happened in the game. And again, like important to note that you may not come across it in game because it plays in those pubs and you may be just beelining to the next mission. So like it could be easy to miss. Like it's a standout on the soundtrack, but I can't remember necessarily myself hearing it in the context of the game. The other song is Family. And so Family brings back Jesper Kyd's score and motif from his track Ezio's Family from the Assassin's Creed 2 soundtrack, which it's a very, very memorable, iconic melody.
One of my favorite songs off that soundtrack.
Oh, it's definitely the standout. But in this case, it's voiced by Victoria Atkin, who's the voice of Evie Fry in this game. So it's like bringing the modern, reminding a bit of the past as far as a game release is concerned. Just a really cool song. So what will I never forget about Assassin's Creed Syndicate? Aside from the score and just how remarkable it is and memorable, I think it's the twins. I played most of the game when I could as Evie, to be honest, because like that was the big deal at the time, right? Assassin's Creed Unity, Ubisoft can't program women assassins, but yet here they did.
That was such a self-made problem.
It really, really was. Even when in Liberation, which was a couple years before, it was a game that was on the Vita, but that was the first, female assassin leading that game. But because it was on Vita, it was not considered a main game. Not as many people remember it. But yeah, the twins and how they kind of play off each other, the conflicts that they have, it's just really remarkable and memorable on that front. But then I learned that there's a whole section in this game that is easy to be missed. It's why I missed it. And looking back on it, I was blown away to learn that there is a whole section of this game that takes place in World War I. It's like apparently Ubisoft snuck in what could have been a full-fledged DLC into the game. And at a certain point in progression, like a marker on the edge of your map pops up. And it's a portal to the future where you're playing as Jacob's granddaughter in World War I, and you're interacting with Winston Churchill. And I'm just like, what the hell? I totally missed this. And if you're learning about this for the first time and you played this game and you didn't discover that, surprise, because that's a thing. So it kind of makes me want to replay this game a lot because, like I said, it's my third favorite in the whole series, and I really could do with playing it again.
Alrighty, I'm still reeling from there's a portal to the future, but hey, sure.
I mean, I could tell you the narrative consequences and how this character Juno, who's trying to get back into the real world and act as lord of the world, essentially, is trying to communicate with the player in this way that, hey, maybe we can work together in the future. And this is her way of trying to get in. But again, it's messy. It was a time where they were kind of wishy-washy on the lore and they didn't know where they want to go. At least that's how I kind of take it. But yeah, those are these Ubisoft games for this week. So, one for Beyond Good and Evil, where it's just a very different soundtrack than you'd expect for a video game, and really cool different cultural influences. And then another with Syndicate that's just so different than a usual Assassin's Creed score, but it's this smaller, intimate, really just expertly crafted piece. And just I'm really happy that we got to talk about them this week.
Not to mention, it's a whole sort of country we haven't touched yet, being France. Because we've hit a lot of American games. We've hit a Venezuelan game. We've hit a lot of Japanese stuff. But this is our first foray into Europe, if I'm remembering correctly. Mm-hmm. Am I remembering incorrectly?
And then Quebec, for Syndicate, so yeah.
Yeah, that's two countries, now that I think about it. For some reason, my brain was like, yeah, it's Ubisoft. It's French. No, he said Quebec. That's Canadian.
French-Canadian, it makes sense.
It's the most French part of Canada. I can't be expected to keep track of all of them. But yeah, now it's Canada and France. We can mark both of those off. Even though the composer of the Canadian game was American, we're just going to count where the game came from.
But we hope that you got to learn as much about these soundtracks as we did, because whether it's the history of the game or the history of the composition of the soundtrack, it's always good to learn about these things. And we hope we can pass that knowledge along to you. So that'll do it for this week on Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at Pete Speakeasy. Joe is over at The Dobaga. You can find the video version of this show over on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel. But if you want to download that MP3, put it in your ears, bring it on your car rides to work or you're at work, that's over on Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. Of course, you can subscribe to the podcast feeds on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, wherever you get your podcasts from. And to recommend different soundtracks or just give us feedback on the show, our social media is over at Soundchat OST. I'll wrap things up and play us out with a fan cover of a song from the Assassin's Creed Syndicate soundtrack. Peter Hollins on YouTube is well known for doing a cappella covers. And so he had his take on Underground. I guess that'll do it for us here on Original Soundchat. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Leave them underground. Them that whispered dreams that only poisoned us, them that told us lies of their bravery, them that preached of progress and put us in the